Music in Nazi Germany, like all cultural activities under the regime, was under the control and coordination, Gleichschaltung, of various state and Nazi party entities, with propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels and prominent Nazi theorist Alfred Rosenberg playing major and sometimes competing roles. The primary concerns of these organizations were to exclude Jewish composers and musicians from publishing and performing music, and to prevent public performances of music considered Jewish, anti-German, or in some way degenerate. At the same time, they promoted the work of favored Germanic composers, such as Richard Wagner and Anton Bruckner. These works were believed to contribute positively to the Volksgemeinschaft, or the German people's community. The Nazis promoted Aryan ideologies through strict censorship and cultural control, blacklisting Jewish music, banning specific performances in concert halls, and controlling radio content to foster nationalism through cultural unity. By controlling the media, the Reich Chamber of Culture could dictate public opinion regarding musical culture and reaffirm its hegemonic beliefs by promoting Aryan works aligned with Nazi ideology. Propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels famously proclaimed radio as the most influential and important intermediary between a spiritual movement and the nation, between the idea and the people. He dedicated much effort to exploiting radio technologies and their ability to reach the German people, regardless of socioeconomic status. To this end, a low-cost receiver called the Volksempfänger was introduced. The 19th century brought a change in economic circumstances in Germany. The rise of industrialization and urban expansion introduced a new market for music. Individuals could participate in musical culture through small social clubs and orchestras that could easily acquire sheet music and instruments. This gave rise to an extensive music network among German citizens. It resulted in the creation of more local concert halls and orchestras, significantly increasing the circulation of German and Jewish compositions. When Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party came to power in Germany, they intervened to control these musical cultural products as part of their general policy of Gleichschaltung, or coordination. In a speech given in 1935, propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels proclaimed the goals of Nazi control over German music. Music, according to him, should be German, should be tied to the Volk, the German nation, and should express the soul of Germany, die deutsche Seele. The interpretation of these romantic goals was left to competing authorities, who debated whether one musical key was more Nordic than another, and what the Jewish influence on music was. As one contemporary author summarized, they didn't want a simple return to 19th century romanticism, nor a continuation of the Weimar avant-garde, but also didn't want experimentation. As with most other aspects of the Third Reich's government, Adolf Hitler's personal views and preferences played a significant role in Nazi control over music. Hitler's typical modus operandi was to create overlapping and competing agencies within the Nazi Party and the German state apparatus, and to allow the heads of these agencies to work toward the Führer. Hitler would usually make his preferences known, or if he didn't, the agency leaders would make assumptions about what they were, and then, usually without specific orders or directives from Hitler, they would adjust their decisions according to what they believed he desired. The overlap of various authorities often led to conflicts, which were then brought to Hitler for final resolution. However, Hitler disliked making such decisions and often allowed situations to deteriorate for long periods before making a sudden decision or when a choice became the most obvious. This was the case in the domain of music, where Nazi theorist Alfred Rosenberg and Goebbels were in conflict, and their somewhat differing ideological goals and viewpoints often led to clashes. Generally, after the creation of the Reich Chamber of Culture, Goebbels had the advantage, but sometimes Rosenberg prevailed, or at least managed to hinder Goebbels' plans. Regarding music, Hitler had clear opinions about what was acceptable and what was not. He was passionate about the music of Richard Wagner, but denounced most contemporary music, which featured atonality, dissonance, and disturbing rhythms, in many cases influenced by what Hitler called black jazz, as degenerate and elitist. Hitler also criticized Nazis who wanted to ban Mozart's The Magic Flute because of its Masonic theme, or those who wanted to suppress Christian religious music, which he considered part of the German cultural heritage. He was also willing, in the interest of foreign policy, to relax the general requirement of Germanness in concert music, allowing even modern Italian operas to be performed, such as those by the anti-Nazi Hungarian composer Béla Bartók. Hitler's direct and personal involvement in musical matters was generally limited to appointing conductors and granting the title of professor and other honorary music-related titles. Despite Germany being, in general, a culturally sophisticated musical nation, the Gleichschaltung of German music required less effort than in any of the other arts, with fewer non-Jewish musical figures choosing to emigrate into exile. Another factor was that once Hitler took power, he showed less interest in music than in controlling painting and sculpture. In those fields, ideologically impure artists were sometimes threatened with being sent to concentration camps. Ideologically suspicious composers, for the most part, were allowed to continue writing music, and sometimes even managed to have it performed, unlike suspicious painters and sculptors, who had their works and materials confiscated. Competing Nazi entities separately claimed control over all musicians and musical material publications, each hoping eventually to become the administrative authority over all culture, including music, in Nazi Germany. Alfred Rosenberg, who saw himself as the chief ideologue of the party, played a key role in the early days before Hitler came to power, founding many sub-organizations, such as the party's Militant League for German Culture, Kampfbund für Deutsche Kultur. This organization had departments for music, film, visual arts, and radio. Hoping to strengthen suppressed Aryan artists and eliminate degenerate ones, such as Jews and jazz musicians, Rosenberg's institutions published many inflammatory pamphlets warning citizens about non-German nationalist music. His institution funded Aryan musicians and went as far as disrupting concerts, threatening Jewish artists, and intimidating audiences. These practices marked the beginning of comprehensive political intervention in the concert halls and orchestras of the 19th century. In March 1933, Hitler appointed Joseph Goebbels as Minister of Public Enlightenment and Propaganda. Goebbels' intention was for his ministry to take control of all German culture, but he encountered the already established infrastructure of Rosenberg's party apparatus. Fortunately for him, Rosenberg's activist stance caused considerable disruption, which became politically inconvenient for Hitler. This allowed Goebbels to persuade the Führer to sign a decree creating the Reich Chamber of Culture, Reichskulturkammer, on September 22, 1933, with Goebbels as president. Goebbels used the chambers not only to regulate the arts, but also to improve pensions and get rid of unqualified and untrained artists. Although other powerful Nazis were competing with Goebbels to some extent regarding music, they agreed on the desired outcome, which was the removal of Jewish musicians and composers and the suppression of their music. Although it took longer than it might have due to objections from the Ministry of Economy about potential economic harm, by mid-1935, Jews had been effectively removed from German culture, including music, through suppression, censorship, and emigration. All musical organizations, from local choirs to professional symphonies, including the Berlin Philharmonic, had been purged of Jewish members. This was largely made possible by the Law for the Restoration of the Professional Civil Service, dating from April 1933. This law essentially dismissed hundreds of Jewish citizens from civil service, including musicians and composers who were civil servants from German orchestras and concert halls. Being German, or Aryan, was not the only consideration in determining whether a composer's music would be permitted in Nazi Germany. Modernist or atonal music was discouraged, even when the composers were German or Austrian. Goebbels believed that music could create a public emotional and spiritual experience competitive with religion. Concert halls, with their darkened auditoriums and formal environments, exposed the audience to an experience similar to attending church. Joseph Goebbels famously stated that radio was an instrumental tool for the nation-state to influence the masses. In Radio as the eighth great power, Goebbels emphasized the importance of radio as a mediator between the government and the nation. He blamed the profit-oriented radio industry for diluting the political potential of the medium. Corporate entities focused more on profit than on political enlightenment, motivating Goebbels to impose strict Nazi control over the industry. The Radio Technology Office launched the Volksempfänger, the People's Receiver, in August 1933. The low price of 76 German marks, approximately 2 weeks' wages, allowed the masses to become radio consumers. However, these units were of poor quality and often broke. With replacement parts hard to find, a thriving black market for them emerged. Under the Chamber of Culture, the party's propaganda department, or Reichspropagandaleitung, was responsible for regulating radio. Goebbels understood that although radio was an effective mechanism for disseminating propaganda, radio programming could not be dominated by propaganda alone, as the listener would get bored and switch stations. As early as May 1934, he was rejecting requests from high-ranking Nazi officials for airtime and insisted that radio station administrations offer a mix of interesting and imaginative content, including music, and not primarily martial music. The first law, he wrote to them in March 1933, is not to be boring. Despite this warning, at first Hitler's speeches and other forms of propaganda dominated the airwaves. During the Labor Day celebrations in 1934, 17 hours of speeches, songs, and marches were broadcast. Over time, between 1932 and 1939, the amount of time dedicated to music gradually increased to 33%, and 87.5% of that was popular music. By 1944, the radio network broadcast 190 hours of content, of which 71 hours were popular music and 24 were classical music. Due to the war, some listeners opposed the broadcasting of popular music, especially those in rural areas, who objected to romantic singers and dance music. However, these programs were popular among German troops and those in the labor service, and the moral value of music prevailed. Stations played music by approved Aryan composers, such as Wagner, prohibiting any Jewish compositions or degenerate music, such as the newly popular American jazz. Goebbels recognized the importance of popular music, stating that not all music pleases everyone. Therefore, that cheerful style of music found among the masses also has a right to exist. Unlike degenerate music, popular music was accepted as long as it reinforced the theme of nationalism. Everything must include the theme of our great work of reconstruction, or at least not stand in its way. He emphasized that popular music and entertainment, while not directly affecting political enlightenment, provide cultural enrichment and a potential step toward cultural imperialism. The varied number of bureaucrats and committees involved in the radio industry resulted in a non-conventional structure. The lack of unified organization across the entire industry was an obstacle to productivity and a sign of corruption, according to Goebbels. State-regulated radio was necessary to meet the needs of the masses, placing their common good first. With the Ministry of Propaganda in place after August 1939, Goebbels exercised complete control over the radio industry, from content to distribution. Now, instead of regulating music at the local level in concert halls, Goebbels and the Chamber of Culture had centralized control over the massively influential medium that was radio. Through the saturation of German nationalist music and the boycott of Jewish compositions, Goebbels used cultural products to exert political control. Just as in classical music, Jewish popular artists were forced to halt their performances and were often sent to concentration camps. The cabaret artist Fritz Grunbaum was stopped at the border when he tried to leave Austria after the annexation and was sent to Buchenwald and later to Dachau, where he died in 1941. The notable Bohemian lyricist Fritz Lohner-Beda, who collaborated on operettas with Franz Lehár, spent some time in Dachau and Buchenwald before being sent to Auschwitz, where he was beaten to death in the Monowitz subcamp. The hit songwriter from Silesia, Ralph Erwin, left Germany in 1933 after the Nazi seizure of power, but was later captured in France and died in an internment camp there. Music played a significant role in the everyday life and propaganda of the Nazi regime, serving as a tool to shape public opinion and reinforce nationalist values. Radio was one of the main means of disseminating this music, and over the years, there was an evolution in radio programming with an increase in the amount of popular music compared to classical music. The government's strict control over the radio industry allowed it to shape the musical taste of the masses according to its ideologies, while still recognizing the importance of popular entertainment as a way to maintain the morale of the population. Although the Nazi regime attempted to censor and control music according to its policies of racial purity and nationalism, the appeal of popular music and entertainment prevailed, despite efforts at manipulation. Sentimental and popular songs, including love songs, remained popular among the German public, especially among the troops and those in the labor service. Radio became a powerful tool for propaganda and the dissemination of political messages, but it was also a means of entertainment and solace during a tumultuous period in German history.